The alien princess hid him, and the empire fell into panic. Merchants moved in steady flows along the observation terraces, their voices a soft wash of different tones and scales. The ring was a crossroads for many species, a place where new things arrived and old promises were traded. Humans were almost never among those new things. Elias stood at the end of the shuttle plank and looked out across a world he had never seen before. He felt a small, strange happiness that came from being far from home and still safe. He held a worn metallic case in one hand and a folded scarf in the other. The case was light but tightly locked. Elias did not know what was inside would cause an empire to stir, or that a princess would choose to hide him. He only knew two simple things. He had left Earth with one small mission, and he had to keep walking. The customs bay smelled of warm metal and sweet pollen. The ring used plants to filter its air. Elias walked toward the processing beams, his shoes whispering on the floor. He noticed citizens looking at him. The looks were quick and curious, not cruel. Humans were rare. The murmurs followed his steps like echoes. He kept his head low and tried to appear ordinary. Ordinary had kept him alive long enough. A tall officer with a deep blue crest stepped forward and raised a hand. She moved with precise gestures. "Name," she said in the trade tongue, which Elias understood because he had learned languages on slow nights and with patient teachers. "Elias Morgan," he answered. His voice sounded small in the wide hall. "Elias Morgan," she repeated, eyes narrowing as if testing the sound. "Reason for arrival, personal business," he said. He did not lie. The case at his side was his business, even if he could not explain its meaning yet. The officer studied the shuttle manifest in her palm. She tapped a few control nodes and then looked up. "Humans are not usually here. Wait, clearance is required." Her tone held no anger, only procedure. She gestured for him to wait near a pillar where holograms spiraled like small suns. Elias waited. He watched traders barter in patterns that looked like dances. He watched a child with scales like polished stone chase an errant ribbon. The ring was a place of small wonders. Elias felt a small green seed of something like hope take root. Maybe this city of travelers would let him pass without trouble. A signal blinked at the office and a whisper spread. Elias had little time to wonder what the whisper meant. Footsteps came with a sharp rhythm. Two scouts in silver vests moved toward him. Their faces were masked by formal calm. They did not look like officers who wanted to argue. They were instruments of the council. "Elias Morgan," the first scout announced. "You are requested for questioning by Imperial Security." Elias swallowed. He had expected questions. He had not expected the word requested to sound like the ringing of a trap. He held his case closer and managed a steady smile. "Of course, I will go." The scouts led him down a corridor that sloped toward the heart of the ring. The walls here bore intricate carvings, histories of the empire in lines and spirals. Every step felt heavier. Elias' mind raced. He had been careful, he had disguised his documents, kept his device hidden. Yet he could not help thinking about the possibility that they might find the case. They reached a pivot chamber with windows facing a planet draped in deep green. The scouts produced polite questions and polite scans. They were thorough but not cruel. Elias answered each one with the truth that fit and the silence that did not betray his purpose. He was not proud of lies, but he had learned to bend words like small branches in a storm. Above, in the high halls of the royal enclave, Liara watched the feeds with hands folded. She was young by her people's measure, and not yet heavy with the roles other heirs carried like stones. Her hair fell in a simple braid down one shoulder, and her eyes held a quiet like water. She had been trained to see patterns in movement, to read small changes in voice, to notice when a merchant's hand lingered too long on a ledger. The ring's exchange nodes had sung a note of disturbance to her. She had asked for the feed as a quiet exercise. She had not expected to see him. The human was not merely a rare shape on the screen. There was something about his posture, about the way he held his head, that made him different. Most arrivals flinched at a scan or at a guard's approach. He did not. Elias moved like someone who expected caution from others but not fear for himself. Liara felt a small thrill. "Who is he?" she asked the aide at her side. Her voice carried the patience of a child asking a puzzle. "A human princess," the aide replied. "Elias Morgan." Arrival manifest says he is a technician and trader. He carries a locked case. "A locked case," Liara repeated. The words shaped possibilities. She requested a closer feed and the aide obliged. The screens showed Elias in a chamber, calm and polite as those scouts inspected him. Liara leaned forward, catching a small flash from the case as it turned in Elias' hands. It was a flash so brief that only a prince with a love of small things would have noticed. Liara did not want to see a case. She wanted to know what the case told about the man who held it. She had reasons, private and quiet, for making her own choices. The council saw the empire in rules and lines. Liara saw it in the spaces between rules. She knew the empire had strength, but she wondered if it had something else, room for change. A human could be a spark. Perhaps he could also be a mirror. She decided she would meet him. Liara issued a benign order. A ceremonial escort would bring the human to the palace for a customary presentation. The scouts complied. They did not suspect anything. The ring complied with tradition. It was rhythm, and the council moved the way a well-drummed choir moves. Elias walked into the palace like a smaller world. Hands guided him through chambers where frescoes told of generations that had served in light and shadow. He answered the attendants' questions with the same calm he kept for the scanners. The palace smelled of old stone and fresh foods. It felt safe in a strange way. Elias could make himself believe for a moment that this would be a short stop, paperwork completed, and then onward. Liara met him in the central atrium, where a fountain made soft music. She wore a gown of muted silver that allowed people to see her, but not to be blinded by her. Her eyes studied him as one might study a rare plant, polite, curious, not yet touching. Elias saw her and bowed in the manner he had practiced for courts on distant planets. He bowed not out of deference to rank so much as out of a recognition of ritual. They had each learned different kinds of bowing, and in that moment their gestures found meaning. "Welcome to the palace," Liara said. Her voice was measured but kind. "You are far from home." Elias met her gaze. "I am. Thank you for the welcome, princess." They spoke in the trade tongue, and translation aides hummed like small insects. They exchanged small talk about the ring and the planet. Liara asked simple questions and Elias answered with polite replies. His answers were careful. He did not reveal the case's secret, but he showed his hands were empty of threat. Liara found she liked that. They walked through a quiet hall together where tapestries told of the empire's first voyages. Liara asked him about his life. Elias told her a story shaped by simple truth. He had been a technician on a research vessel that studied old stars. He had seen places where light bent and where life clung in tight, surprising pockets. He spoke of long nights and close friendship, of a decision to travel for a chance to share something he and his colleagues had found. He did not mention names or detailed maps, only the sense that humans had a way of fixing things with hands and a kind of hopeful recklessness. Liara listened and felt her thought move. She was untrained in human ways, but she could sense pattern. Humans, she realized, had a way of simplifying problems until they could be solved with what's at hand. The empire had tools and systems that solved problems in complex and careful ways. That difference excited her rather than frightened her. Back in the chambers below, the council convened with voices that sharpened like knives. The missing human had caused a small ripple into a large current. They were not violent people in their thought, but they had learned to remove risks with efficient decisions. "A human is an unpredictable agent," one elder said. "Our network must reassess its vulnerabilities." Find him, another said. The case could contain data that alters our stability. We cannot allow change to creep in. Liara did not hear all of their words. She heard a quality of fear. Fear, to her, was a signal that the Empire had closed a door and would not open it again unless someone stepped in. The Council's patterns were old and secure. Their logic moved like heavy wheels. Liara decided, quietly and without fanfare, that she would place herself between those wheels and the human. She asked aides to reroute the escort and to call for a private audience. Why hide him? One aide whispered when Liara's request reached his ears in private. He did not think of rebellion. He thought of the consequences of small acts in a system made of great acts. Liara's smile was calm. Because I would see who he is before the wheel crushes him, she said. Because perhaps he is a key, and a key should be examined before it is broken. The aide did not ask more. He had seen Liara's quiet choices before. They often led to small changes that later became known as mercy or wisdom. Elias found himself guided to an inner suite that smelled of lavender and old books. The suite was not a prison. It had windows that looked onto private gardens and soft cushions on the bench. Liara sat opposite him, not like a ruler but like someone who had decided to ask a friend to stay a while. I will offer you shelter, she said, not because I disobey the council, but because I believe we should both learn first. Elias was careful not to be presumptuous. He had reasons to accept help. He also had reasons to be cautious. He laid the case on a table and wrapped his fingers around it like a promise. I appreciate your kindness, he said. My purpose here might cause trouble. I only want to explain what I can. Liara's eyes lit. Then tell me, she urged. He opened nothing. He did not show her the case. Instead, he told her where he had been and what he knew in a way that asked for understanding. He spoke of a device that could compress data into a living map, a tool that allowed networks to predict environmental patterns in ways older systems could not. He spoke of how humans and their partners had used such tools to heal dying habitats back home. He did not claim miracles. He claimed methods that worked through small adjustments. Liara listened like someone hearing a song in a new key. Her mind connected images, gardens that recovered faster, food networks that would not fail, ships that could mend themselves more easily. She imagined briefly an empire that used such tools not to conquer but to protect its fragile places. Her excitement was quiet and bright. Above them, the council's net tightened. The ring scouts made polite inquiries and more direct ones. Screens showed a human in a suite where attendants came and went. The council's fingers hovered over protocols. Panic was not fire or shouting. Here it was a careful running through of what-ifs until the body of the council shivered. If he influences the palace, one elder said, our systems may adapt. If our systems adapt without review, tradition could erode. If tradition erodes, the council's authority may wobble. The chain will fail. Such chains of thought made the council move like a herd closing in on a strange plant. They could not yet see the human in Liara's suite as anything but a variable. They would act on variables. Liara had learned to listen for the sound of a system closing in. She knew when a choice became urgent not because of the council's calls, but because one small life might be crushed under the weight of its own fear. She decided to be the soft wall that put distance between the human and the storm. She ordered the suite to be made private, to be kept off records, and for a small, trusted staff to attend them. She did not hide her choice in drama. She simply asked for privacy, and in a system made of rituals, privacy was a strong thing. Elias felt both grateful and guilty. He had not come to start a quiet revolution. He had come to share a tool. Yet he could not deny that the palace was calm and that the human habit of hope had found a warm shelter. He told Liara more about the device in small, careful details, never revealing how it worked but giving the sense that it was about connection, not destruction. When Liara walked him back toward the atrium at dusk, They moved like two people who had crossed a small, invisible line. The city lights along the ring flickered on, soft and patient. Traders called last bargains. The ring hummed with life that did not yet know the shape of the days to come. Unknown to them both, a ripple spread from the council chambers. Protocol updates flagged the human as a person of interest. The word concern moved down the channels like a slow river. Advisors suggested formal searches and increased patrols. The Empire's leaders began to speak in a tone that made change sound like a storm. Liara watched a feed of the Council's reaction and felt the small knot in her chest tighten. She had chosen to begin with kindness. She had chosen to learn. The Empire, she knew, moved slowly but could panic fast. She had no plan to hold back an entire government. She had only a person and a promise, a human in a quiet room with a small device and the certainty that people could be more than their fears. As night fell over Sarah 7 and the trade ring pulsed with gentle light, Liara guided Elias into the suite she had prepared. "Rest," she said simply. "Tomorrow we will decide what to show and what to wait to learn." Elias looked at her with a gratitude that did not require many words. He lay down in a bed that felt both foreign and welcome and watched the ceiling where soft lights imitated stars. Outside, the Empire began its slow, anxious turning. The Council's panic had begun as a whisper. It would grow. For now, in this calm suite, the human and the princess shared a fragile peace. Far below, algorithms ran and flags were raised. The Empire's great machine had noticed a variable it could not yet name. It began to move. The princess had hidden a human in her rooms. The Empire had begun to fall into a panic of ideas, of what-ifs and plans and sudden meetings. In the quiet of the palace, Liara closed her eyes and held that panic carefully in her mind like a hot coal, dangerous, but perhaps able to light a new path if handled with care. Elias awoke to soft light filtering through the tall windows of the suite. The morning sun glimmered off the metallic spires of Sarah 7, sending thin beams across the marble floor. The room smelled of warm bread and fresh herbs, the attendants, early work already filling the suite with subtle life. Elias sat up slowly, his mind replaying the events of the previous day. A palace, a princess, a hidden human, all of it felt like stepping into a story he had only ever read. Yet it was real and it was happening to him. Liara appeared at the doorway, dressed in a simple tunic of muted greens and golds. She carried a small tray with a steaming drink and soft pastries. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady but gentle. "Sleep well." Elias took the tray with a grateful nod. "Better than I have in weeks. The palace is calm here, thank you," Liara smiled faintly. "Calm can be a rare thing. We should enjoy it while it lasts." She gestured toward the window. "Would you like to see the gardens today? They are quiet in the morning. Perhaps we can talk without interruptions." Elias nodded, intrigued. He had been in many green spaces before, but this was unlike any garden he had known. The palace gardens were not merely decorative. They were alive with subtle technology that nurtured plants, monitored growth, and adjusted sunlight. Liara led him down polished halls, their steps echoing softly. The attendants moved silently around them, giving them space without drawing attention. The gardens opened up before them like a painting in motion. Streams of water wound around clusters of alien flora, each plant seeming to respond to the light and the visitor's presence. Elias felt a rare kind of peace, as though the world had paused just for a moment. Liara watched him carefully, noticing the way he examined the plants with quiet curiosity rather than the hurried glance of a tourist. "You notice things," she said softly. "Not many do." "I try," Elias replied. "There is value in watching closely. Sometimes the smallest details hold the most important answers." He looked around at the delicate leaves and small, shimmering flowers. "Your gardens, they are alive but not wild." "Everything has purpose and yet it feels free," Liara nodded. "It is how I like things. Systems can work without smothering life. I think the Empire could learn that too if it would only listen. Elias felt a flicker of excitement. He had spent years observing systems, ecological, mechanical, and social. In every system, he had seen rigidity choke possibility. The Empire is strong, he said carefully, but strength alone can make it blind. Flexibility often comes from unexpected places. Liara's eyes brightened. That is exactly what I hope to hear from you. You see beyond what most see. They walked further into the garden, past fountains shaped like spiraling ribbons of water. Elias noticed small creatures that resembled hummingbirds, yet with translucent wings that glimmered like crystal. They moved with precise patterns, never colliding, yet always dancing. Elias marveled at how the creatures seemed to interact with both plants and streams, a living code that maintained balance. You see the order, Liara said, following his gaze. But do you see the patterns within it, how each movement affects the others? Yes, Elias replied. It is like a network. One change in a small part can ripple through the whole system. I think that is what humans do best. We notice, adjust, and create connections others might miss. Liara stopped near a low fountain and turned to him. That is why I hid you. The Council sees humans as unpredictable as chaos, but I think chaos has its own wisdom. Sometimes it teaches what rigid order cannot. Elias hesitated. I appreciate your trust, Princess. I do not want to disrupt your world. I only want to offer something that may help if you choose to use it. Liara's gaze was steady. You may help, but first we must understand each other. The Council is already uneasy, and their fear grows with every passing hour. They spent the morning in quiet conversation. Elias spoke of his life among stars, of machines that repaired themselves, and habitats that adjusted to survive. Liara listened attentively, asking questions that revealed her desire to understand, not to judge. The human and the princess moved in sync, two minds exploring the possibilities of systems, life, and learning. Meanwhile, the council began to sense the absence of the human more acutely. In chambers far above the gardens, elders gathered around glowing panels. He is not in the trade ring records, one said, nor in the palace's public list. Where is he? A younger advisor replied. All attempts to trace him show a delay, an anomaly in the registry. It is as though he has vanished from the normal paths. This is unacceptable, an elder said, frowning. We cannot allow a variable to remain unknown. The Empire's order relies on certainty. We must act. Unbeknownst to them, Liara had already taken steps to protect Elias. She had created a private corridor, rerouted surveillance feeds, and instructed a handful of loyal attendants to maintain discretion. She moved with quiet precision, aware that the Council's panic was building and that one wrong move could compromise her plan. Back in the gardens, Elias pulled out his small case, careful not to open it in full view. I should show you this, he said, but not yet. It is delicate and its impact depends on timing. Liara nodded. We will wait. Patience is part of strategy, as you humans seem to understand well. He smiled faintly. We try, but sometimes impatience drives innovation too. They walked to a small grove of trees with leaves that shimmered silver in the sunlight. Here, Liara asked him about the device he carried and how it worked in general terms. Elias explained that it could analyze environments, map resources, and predict shifts in ecosystems. He spoke in a way that emphasized learning and adaptation rather than control or power. Liara listened and considered how such a tool might be applied to the Empire's systems. Not to dominate, not to conquer, but to strengthen the network of planets, cities, and people in ways that were subtle and lasting. She realized that the human had a perspective her counselors lacked, one that combined curiosity, creativity, and empathy. As the day passed, Liara and Elias moved through the palace quietly, learning from each other. Elias marveled at the architecture, the delicate balance of light and shadow, the technology woven seamlessly into the living spaces. Liara marveled at his ability to see connections and patterns invisible to most. In the afternoon, a soft chime alerted them to a visitor, an aide bearing a message from the council. Liara took it with calm hands and read quickly. The council demanded that the human be located immediately and questioned. Panic tinged every line. She handed the note back. "They are growing anxious," she said, "but we are not yet ready to reveal anything. We must be careful." Elias looked at her, concern in his eyes. "I do not want to cause trouble. I will follow your guidance." Liara nodded. "You are not causing trouble by existing. You are causing the council to confront its own rigidity. That is something it has rarely done." Evening fell over Sarah 7. The gardens glowed faintly with biolights that shifted colors as the sun disappeared. Elias and Liara watched from a terrace, the city below alive with lights and movement. Traders called final prices, shuttles lifted into orbit, and the ring hummed its endless song. "This empire," Elias said, "it is vast and strong, but it fears the unknown. I have seen that in every system I have visited." Liara turned to him, eyes reflecting the glow of the gardens. "Then we will teach it something new, not by force, not by argument, but by showing a different way. You, Elias, may be the spark." Elias felt a quiet thrill at her words. He had left Earth expecting challenges, but he had not anticipated trust like this. A princess choosing to protect him, to learn from him, to move quietly against an empire's panic. This was a gift and a responsibility. They returned to the suite as night fully settled. The room was cool and inviting, filled with soft shadows. Elias placed the case on a table and ran his hands over its surface. It had been quiet for centuries, waiting for someone who could use it with thought rather than fear. Liara watched him. "Rest now," she said. "Tomorrow we begin to understand what is possible. The council will continue to search, but we have time to plan. That is a rare advantage." Elias nodded, feeling the weight of her trust. "I will not waste it." The night deepened. Beyond the palace walls, the Empire's systems hummed with concern. Alerts had been triggered, protocols reviewed, and lists compiled. The council's panic had begun, subtle but growing like ripples moving through water. Inside the palace, two unlikely allies rested. The human had learned to trust, the princess to hope. Together, they held a fragile balance between secrecy and revelation, between curiosity and caution. By the time stars fully blanketed the sky, the Empire had begun to stir in unease, unaware that the human it sought had found sanctuary, and that the princess who hid him had begun a quiet, remarkable plan. The day to come would test their patience, their ingenuity, and their understanding of what it truly meant to guide an empire toward a future it could not yet imagine. Elias fell asleep, thinking of stars and gardens, machines and life, of patterns that connected all things. Liara sat nearby, watching the palace settle into quiet, already planning the next step in a game that neither spoke aloud but both understood. Survival through insight, change through understanding, and a spark that might light the empire without anyone needing to fight. The council's panic continued to rise slowly, unaware that its greatest challenge was not force, but the quiet brilliance of a human mind guided by trust, and the courage of a princess willing to protect it. Elias woke to a soft, orange light spilling through the suite's windows. Outside, the gardens were still wrapped in the quiet of dawn, leaves shimmering with dew, water from the fountains reflecting the first rays of the sun. He stretched, feeling a curious mix of calm and anticipation. Today would not be like yesterday. Today, he would begin to understand the full extent of the empire he had stepped into, and perhaps, Liara hoped, begin to show them the value of his knowledge. Liara was already awake. She had dressed in her usual tunic of muted silver, simple and elegant, allowing her to move quickly without drawing unnecessary attention. She was arranging papers and small devices on a table, her movements deliberate. "Good morning," she said, without turning her head. We have little time before the council begins its routines. We must be cautious. Elias nodded, taking the tray she offered him with warm tea and soft bread. He sipped carefully, savoring the flavors of a culture unfamiliar yet inviting. "I am ready," he said, his mind alert. "What shall we do first?" Liara motioned for him to follow. "The palace has systems that could benefit from your insight. Small adjustments, not to override but to suggest." They moved through corridors lined with art and carvings, halls that whispered of generations of rulers. Elias could feel the weight of history in every step, and yet, walking beside Liara, he felt a strange lightness. She understood observation and patience, and together they moved quietly, like two travelers exploring a world designed to test their curiosity. Their first stop was the energy core of the palace, a vast chamber where power flowed in streams of light. The energy conduits pulsed with steady rhythm, providing life and comfort to the entire complex. Elias examined the interface panels with careful eyes. He noticed inefficiencies, small gaps in distribution, slight delays in balancing output across sectors. These were tiny, almost invisible flaws that no one else had noticed. "This system," Elias said, pointing to a conduit that carried energy to the gardens, "could adjust dynamically to changes in sunlight and water flow. It would make the gardens even more resilient." Liara leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the panels. "You are suggesting it think ahead rather than follow a fixed routine." "Yes," Elias replied. "It's simple, small predictive adjustments. The gardens and the palace would operate in harmony without much intervention." Liara smiled faintly. "This is what I hoped you could teach me. You see possibilities where others see rules." They worked quietly, adjusting sequences and introducing subtle suggestions to the system. Within minutes, small changes began to ripple through the palace's infrastructure. Lights shifted to complement the sun's rise, fountains adjusted to conserve water, and climate controls adapted to the early warmth. Everything flowed smoother, yet it was imperceptible to anyone who did not know what to look for. As they worked, a small chime alerted them to another visitor, an attendant carrying reports from the council. Liara took the reports with her usual calm, scanning the information. The council had noticed anomalies in palace routines, minor fluctuations in energy usage, slight shifts in resource allocation. They did not yet know the cause, but they were growing anxious. "They suspect something," Liara said, handing the papers to Elias. "But they do not know what or where," Elias read quickly. "They are worried about change, even small change. It seems the Empire is not used to adapting without a strict command." Liara nodded. "That is true. Fear of the unknown shapes many of their decisions. That is why your insight is valuable. You think differently, but you do not seek to control. You offer possibilities." Elias considered her words. He had traveled through systems and planets where rigidity had caused collapse or stagnation. Here, the Empire was strong, well-ordered, but hesitant. Hesitation in such a complex system could be a source of vulnerability, but also an opportunity. They spent the rest of the morning moving through different sections of the palace. In the kitchens, Elias suggested minor adjustments to storage and energy use that would reduce waste. In the library, he helped reorganize information flows so that knowledge could be accessed faster, without disturbing traditions. In the medical wing, he showed ways to monitor health systems more efficiently using predictive modeling. Everywhere he went, small improvements appeared, each one almost invisible but cumulatively powerful. Liara watched him with fascination. His methods were simple yet profound. He did not command, he guided. He did not impose, he suggested. And yet the results were undeniable. The palace, once merely functional, began to operate with a quiet elegance that had previously been missing. By mid-afternoon, word of the humans' presence and subtle influence began to seep through the Empire's networks. Advisors and scouts reported unusual patterns in palace activity. Sensors noted minor optimizations in energy and resource flow. Nothing overt, nothing that broke rules, but enough to make the council uneasy. In the council chambers, discussions grew tense. "The human cannot be ignored," one elder said, tapping a panel that displayed energy use across the palace. "These shifts are precise. Someone is teaching the palace systems new behaviors." A younger advisor frowned. "But who? A single human cannot influence so much without assistance. We must find him." The elder shook his head. "It is not a matter of force. The council relies on certainty. If a variable like this human persists, we lose control. We must act." Above all, the council's unease grew quietly but steadily. Panic in such a methodical system was subtle. It took the form of extra reports, repeated scans, and increased attention to minor anomalies. Yet the human and Liara remained hidden, moving calmly as if the tension above did not exist. In the late afternoon, Liara took Elias to a chamber where the Empire stored information about planets under its care. Holomaps shimmered in the air, showing colonies, trade routes, and resource distribution. Liara gestured to a set of maps. "These are our networks," she said. "Everything the Council manages. Do you see what is possible?" Elias studied the holograms, noting inefficiencies in logistics and communication. "The networks are strong," he said, "but there are bottlenecks. Predictive adjustments could make trade and resource sharing more efficient. Nothing breaks the rules, but everything flows better." Liara leaned closer. "Show me." Together, they adjusted flows in the simulation, suggesting alternative routes, shifting schedules, and balancing loads. Within minutes, the network responded as if alive, the holograms pulsing smoothly with coordinated motion. Liara's eyes widened. This could change how the Empire functions, quietly, efficiently, without anyone realizing until the benefits appear. Elias nodded. "It is subtle. That is the point. Change can be permanent without conflict if it is integrated gently." Evening came, and the palace settled into a softer rhythm. The gardens glowed with biolights, fountains sang their gentle music, and the city below the ring pulsed with quiet activity. Liara and Elias returned to the suite, their minds still alive with patterns and possibilities. "Tomorrow," Liara said, "we will expand beyond the palace. The Empire's networks could benefit if we proceed carefully." Elias nodded. "And the Council?" "They will notice," Liara said. "They already do, but they do not yet understand that change can be an ally rather than a threat." Night fell fully over Sarah 7. In the suite, Elias opened the small case, revealing a compact device filled with intricate mechanisms and softly glowing energy. He did not show Liara every function. Some things were too delicate, too easily misused. Instead, he demonstrated the predictive systems and simulations, teaching her the principles behind the technology. Liara listened and learned, fascinated by the human ability to see patterns, to anticipate outcomes, and to create solutions that were both simple and profound. She realized that the human mind was a resource in itself, one that could complement the Empire's systems rather than compete with them. Far below, the Council continued its quiet panic. Sensors flagged minor anomalies, energy and resource flows shifted, and reports of strange efficiencies circulated. They could not yet trace the source, and their fear of the unknown grew steadily. Advisors speculated, argued, and repeated scans. None suspected the princess's quiet intervention. Liara and Elias, meanwhile, moved with precision. They were careful, deliberate, and patient. Each adjustment they made was small, yet cumulatively powerful. They were not breaking rules, only improving the flow of life in the palace and its networks. Elias looked out the window, seeing the city lights flicker in harmony with the palace below. "It is strange," he said softly. "We are influencing an empire without anyone fighting, without anyone realizing it. Yet the effects are already spreading." Liara nodded. That is the art of gentle guidance. The council will learn eventually, but by then the change will be established. The Empire may not even notice how much it has grown stronger. They spent the rest of the night planning. Maps were spread across tables, simulations ran quietly, and ideas flowed freely between them. Elias suggested improvements to transportation, communication, and resource management. Liara suggested ways to integrate these changes without alarming the council. Together, they created a quiet revolution, one that would ripple through the empire with efficiency, adaptability, and insight. Outside, the empire stirred in its sleep. Panic was subtle but growing, an undercurrent of fear moving through the chambers of the council. Their systems sensed variables they could not control, efficiencies they could not explain, and yet they continued with routine as best they could. Inside the palace, Elias and Liara rested briefly, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. The humans' influence had begun, gentle but undeniable. The princess's courage had made it possible. Together, they were shaping the future of an empire without a single act of violence, without a single confrontation. The night deepened, and the city below shimmered with quiet life. The empire was waking to the realization that a small human and a careful princess could create change more powerful than any command, more enduring than fear, and more remarkable than anyone could yet imagine. Elias closed his eyes, thinking of patterns, connections, and possibilities. Liara sat nearby, considering patience, guidance, and trust. They had begun to show the empire a new way forward, one step at a time, with quiet brilliance. The council's panic would continue, growing like a slow tide. But for now, the human and the princess had won the most important thing: time, space, and the chance to teach a great empire that change could be gentle, creative, and profoundly effective. The morning light spilled over Sarah 7, casting long shadows across the palace gardens. Fountains glimmered, streams rippled gently, and the soft hum of the city below filled the air with life. Elias awoke, stretching his arms, feeling a quiet excitement. Today would be different. The subtle changes he and Liara had introduced were beginning to ripple beyond the palace walls, and the empire itself would start to notice. Liara stood at the window, observing the gardens. Her eyes reflected the biolights and the soft greenery, and her mind ran through the possibilities for the day. "We must move carefully," she said, turning to Elias. "The council senses change now. Their concern is growing. They may try to intervene." Elias nodded. "We can manage. The adjustments are small but effective. If we continue carefully, they may never realize the source." They walked through the gardens, where the plants responded subtly to their presence, leaves shifting slightly, flowers opening as if to greet them. The palace systems had adapted to their guidance overnight, improving energy efficiency, balancing water distribution, and adjusting climate controls. Small changes, invisible to most, had begun to create harmony across the complex. "Look at this," Elias said, pointing to a section of the gardens where water flowed more smoothly than before, fountains operating with less waste. "The system is learning in a way. It predicts what the plants need when they need it." Liara smiled. "It is like the human mind, noticing patterns and acting with foresight. I see now why you were so valuable. The empire could gain much if it embraced this way of thinking." Elias guided her through the palace, showing how predictive adjustments could extend to resource management, transportation schedules, and energy networks across Sarah 7. Each demonstration was subtle, teaching without commanding, guiding without enforcing. Liara absorbed it all, fascinated by the simplicity yet profound effect of the human approach. By midday, the first signs of change reached the outer rings of the palace. Couriers and minor officials reported unusual efficiencies. Shipments arrived earlier, waste was reduced, energy systems adjusted automatically. Nothing overt had been altered. The palace operated more smoothly without anyone realizing why. In the council chambers, tension grew. The elders studied reports with growing unease. "The human is influencing something beyond the palace," one said, scanning holographic feeds. "Our systems detect patterns we do not understand. It is as if the entire palace anticipates needs without orders." "This is unacceptable," another replied. "A single human cannot possess such reach. He must be located. The council cannot allow this to continue." They dispatched scouts and advisors, attempting to trace the subtle adjustments. Their panic, though quiet and methodical, spread like ripples through the bureaucracy. Every anomaly became a source of concern, every improved efficiency a potential threat. Liara and Elias, however, were ready. They had anticipated the council's scrutiny and had established buffers to protect their work. Each change was incremental, integrated into existing systems, leaving no direct evidence of manipulation. They moved with precision, confident in their quiet strategy. In the afternoon, Elias suggested an expansion of their efforts to the trade networks connected to Sarah 7. These networks had grown large and complex over centuries, but rigidity often caused delays and resource imbalances. "We can make improvements that are subtle yet powerful," he explained. "If we balance the flows and anticipate needs, the empire will operate more efficiently without realizing it." Liara nodded. "Show me how." Together, they examined holographic maps of the trade routes, noting bottlenecks and inefficiencies. Elias demonstrated predictive modeling, showing how minor schedule adjustments could prevent congestion, improve delivery times, and optimize energy usage across the transport fleet. Liara learned quickly, her intuition guiding the integration of these adjustments into the Empire's operations. By evening, the first tangible results became visible. Ships arrived on schedule with greater consistency, warehouses reported reduced waste, and energy consumption across the outer sectors of the palace had decreased. The Empire's systems were beginning to operate with greater harmony, yet the Council remained unaware of the source. Reports reached the Council with urgency. "There are improvements in energy distribution and resource management," an advisor noted. "Patterns emerge that cannot be explained by current protocols." The Council convened, voices calm but laced with tension. "We must locate the human," one elder said. "The palace cannot continue to adapt beyond our oversight." Liara, aware of the council's growing unease, guided Elias back to the suite. She had made preparations for the possibility of intrusion, securing paths and isolating sensitive areas. "They will continue searching," she said. "But the work we are doing is stronger than fear. They may panic, but they cannot stop progress once it takes root." Elias rested briefly, then returned to reviewing the palace systems with Liara. Together, they refined energy flows, adjusted resource allocation, and optimized communication channels. Each improvement was small individually, but collectively, they were transforming how the palace and its networks functioned. Late in the evening, Liara led Elias to the palace balcony. From there, they could see the lights of the city below, shimmering in a pattern that mirrored the palace gardens. Traders moved through the streets, ships took off from the ring, and the Empire's heartbeat pulsed steadily across the planet. "Do you see?" Elias asked. "Everything is connected. Small adjustments here ripple outward. The palace, the city, the empire, they are all part of a larger system, and each system can be improved with careful observation and gentle guidance." Liara's eyes glimmered. "I see it. I understand why the Council fears change, yet I also see the benefits. The Empire could flourish if it embraced this approach, not by command or force, but by learning and adapting." Elias smiled. "That is the essence of what humans do. We notice, adapt, and create connections. Sometimes our actions are invisible, yet the effects last far longer than the direct effort." Across Sarah 7, the Council's panic reached subtle peaks. Alerts had multiplied, and minor inefficiencies were flagged as potential threats. They did not know the source of the improvements, only that their systems were changing in ways that exceeded expectations. Their rigid protocols struggled to interpret the anomalies, yet the Empire continued to function more efficiently. Liara and Elias continued their work into the night. They explored communication networks, transportation routes, and resource flows across the ring. Elias showed Liara how predictive adjustments could prevent congestion, balance energy, and even anticipate needs in advance. Liara applied these insights with precision, reinforcing the subtle improvements without alarming the Council. By the next morning, the Empire had begun to feel the effects. Trade routes were smoother, energy systems more efficient, and resources allocated with remarkable balance. Citizens and officials noticed the improvements, though they could not explain why. Confidence in the Empire's operations grew, and even the Council, despite its unease, could not deny the benefits. Liara and Elias observed these changes quietly. "They see results," Elias said. "Even if they do not understand the cause, the impact is clear." "People will trust improvements when they are tangible," Liara nodded. "It is a beginning. Change without fear is rare, yet it is possible, and it can grow stronger if nurtured carefully." As days passed, the humans' influence expanded subtly across the Empire. Predictive adjustments improved communication, transportation, energy, and resource management. The palace functioned with new efficiency, trade networks flowed smoothly, and citizens began to experience benefits they could not yet explain. The Council, meanwhile, struggled to understand the anomalies. Their panic continued, quiet and methodical, but it could not reverse the improvements. Systems had adapted, processes had been refined, and the Empire itself was changing without confrontation. Liara and Elias moved among these changes like gardeners tending a vast and complex ecosystem. Each adjustment was small, deliberate, and precise, yet the cumulative effect was transformative. They were shaping the Empire with intelligence, insight, and care, showing that change could be gentle, effective, and lasting. One evening, Liara led Elias to the central atrium, where a gathering of advisors and palace officials was taking place. She did not reveal the humans' role directly, but she demonstrated the improvements and their potential. Energy flows balanced automatically, resources were allocated efficiently, and communication networks responded predictively to needs. The advisors were astonished. "How is this possible?" one asked. "The systems are functioning beyond expectations without intervention," Liara smiled. "It is possible when we observe carefully, understand deeply, and guide subtly. Progress does not always require force. Sometimes it requires insight and trust." Elias stood beside her quietly. He did not need to explain. The results spoke for themselves. Human ingenuity had become a force for improvement, not through domination, but through understanding, observation, and gentle guidance. Across Sarah 7, the Empire began to recognize a new way forward. Citizens experienced smoother trade, efficient energy use, and well-managed resources. Confidence grew, and fear began to give way to curiosity and appreciation. The Council, though still cautious, could not ignore the positive outcomes. Liara and Elias had shown that humanity's strength lay not in power or aggression, but in observation, creativity, and the ability to connect systems in ways others had not imagined. The Empire had begun to evolve, not through conflict, but through collaboration and insight. In the palace suite that night, Elias looked out at the city below, lights twinkling like distant stars. Liara joined him, her eyes reflecting both the gardens and the city's glow. "We have done more than improve systems," she said softly. "We have shown that change can be embraced without fear. That is a lesson the Empire will not forget." Elias smiled. "And it began with trust. You trusted me, and that trust allowed us to guide the Empire gently." Liara nodded, trust and patience. The combination is powerful. Even an empire can learn from it. Far below, Sarah 7 hummed with life. Trade flowed smoothly, energy systems balanced themselves, and citizens moved through their routines with ease. The empire, once rigid and fearful of the unknown, had begun to adapt, guided by a human mind and a princess who chose to protect and learn. As night deepened, Elias and Liara reflected on the journey. They had started with a simple goal: understanding, guidance, and improvement. They had transformed the palace and begun to transform the empire itself. And they had done so without violence, without fear, and without forcing anyone to act against their nature. The council, now aware of the improvements, had little choice but to accept the changes. The empire was stronger, more resilient, and more adaptable than it had been before. All of this had come from a partnership between a human and a princess, showing that even the most structured societies could benefit from curiosity, insight, and ingenuity. Elias felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had arrived as a stranger, carrying a small device and a mission. Now he had become a catalyst for change, not through force, but through understanding. Liara had been his guide, protector, and partner in this endeavor, and together they had illuminated a new path for an empire. The stars above Sarah 7 shone brightly that night, reflecting the lights of the city and the palace. A human mind and a princess had sparked transformation, proving that true strength lay not in dominance, but in intelligence, empathy, and creativity. As they stood together, watching the empire move with new efficiency and quiet harmony, both knew that the journey was just beginning. Yet the foundation was set. A human had influenced an empire, and a princess had chosen to hide and guide him. Panic had given way to possibility, fear had turned into understanding, and the galaxy had seen a new example of what humanity could offer. Elias and Liara remained on the balcony, their eyes on the horizon. They had proven that change could be gentle, profound, and lasting. And the empire, quietly, had begun to grow into a brighter, wiser, and more adaptable future. The journey had started with a single choice: to trust and to protect. And in that choice, the empire had found its first glimpse of what true progress could look like: calm, confident, and enduring. The human had arrived, the princess had hidden him, and together they had sparked transformation the empire would remember for generations. The night was still, the gardens glowed softly, and Sarah 7 thrummed with life and possibility. The council, the citizens, and the palace all felt the subtle harmony of progress, unaware that a single human and a princess had led the way. And so, a new chapter began, not written in force, not in fear, but in understanding, ingenuity, and the quiet brilliance of a mind that could see possibilities beyond what was immediately visible. The alien princess hid him, and the empire fell into panic.